Hi, my name is Ari.
And my name is Isha.
And we both are juniors attending Menlo-Atherton High School.
On this podcast, we interview women professionals in our community
to gain a better understanding of the many different paths after graduation for students like ourselves. Today we're here with Miss Hanson. She's one of our AVPs here at Menlo-Atherton. This is her second year here, and we're so excited to talk to her.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about where you went to high school and how you describe your high school experience?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here on your podcast. I'm originally from the Midwest, so I grew up outside of Chicago, south suburbs of Chicago, and I went to a high school. The name of it is Thornton Fractional South, but we called it TF South. My high school experience, I think I would just equate it to kind of like a very, almost kind of like stereotypical Midwestern suburban high school. Like most of the people I grew up with, our parents, we were all like middle class kids. A lot of our dads were like in the trades, like construction workers or electricians, or and like our moms, a lot of people had their moms were like teachers or like worked in our community.
Would you say your high school had a big impact on what you decided to pursue in your college experience and your career?
Well, I was like that kid that didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. Like I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know what I wanted to study. So in terms of my trajectory to college and what I was going to study, I don't think it was necessarily like high school that did that for me, but I would say that my high school experience instilled like a love of education and a love of learning and like a really strong work ethic.
Did you decide, or where did you decide that you wanted to study education or pursue a career in education?
So I was in college, and I went in like undeclared, but I knew I was just going to take my freshman year. I was going to take those classes like that you need to take, gen eds, and I knew that I was going to need a foreign language at some point, just even to graduate. So I had taken Spanish like all through high school. It was a class that I really loved. I loved my high school Spanish teacher. So I started taking Spanish classes, and then I really, really loved it. And I thought, like, what could I do? Like, how could I pair this love of a language with, what could I do with it? And it just so happened that I was in a sorority, and we were doing this volunteer work, and I ended up volunteering at a high school, a middle school, high school thing. It was like a festival or something, and I remember being like, oh, I really like being here. And the school had Spanish speaking parents at this like festival, and I was one of the only people that could talk with them. And that was kind of like my there's like a need, right? And so then I kind of started looking into it more, and then I was like, oh, I can be a Spanish teacher. I can help families that need help. So that's kind of how I ended up taking my Spanish classes and turning them into a major, and then also pairing that with education. When the experience for me in college that till this day is the most pivotal experience of my life is studying abroad. So I ended up choosing Mexico, and it was the best choice I've ever made. So I lived with a host family, and I made so many friends in Mexican friends that I was going to school with that really taught me about language and culture and being different. Like, I was a white Midwestern girl, so I moved to where no one spoke English. I was one of the only white people. I, for the first time in my life, was treated differently. I got to feel what many people feel when they are the person that's different, right? And that has taught me so much about life, and so I remember having many aha moments of like, oh wow, like this is what it feels like. And I think that it's so important that young people, not just young, but if you can do it when you're young, it will serve you into your later years of life, right? Put themselves in positions that they are uncomfortable. because being uncomfortable is where personal growth happens, right? And so that experience changed my whole life. It changed everything about my life.
It's interesting, especially when you mentioned those uncomfortable experiences. We're talking about that in my laying class right now, and how that's kind of like vital for our education, right? When we go to university, we need to be put in uncomfortable situations in order to like grow and learn. And I think that's really important that you're like telling people about that.
The next question is, do you remember any teachers that had an outsized impact on you?
For college, grad school. So I went to college for, undergrad, and then I started teaching, and in my third year of teaching, I went back to school and got my master's degree in bilingual and bicultural education. And I had a professor by the name of Dr. Jason Gula, and I remember I wrote my first paper for him, and I was like, I got this. And I failed it miserably. After that, my goal was like, okay, I'm going to get an A in this guy's class. The program was kind of new, so he taught many classes, and I was like, okay, I'm not just going to have him once, I'm going to have him for like 3 or 4 classes. I got to know him really well, and one of the things that he taught me, besides how to be a good writer, were things about like being a culturally competent teacher, and taking into consideration like how to teach multilingual learners, and the importance of honoring students' heritage and culture and identity, and how do we bring that into school, and how that can be a huge tool in leveraging student growth. And so I think he changed me as an educator, while Mr. Powell, my high school teacher, helped me get through high school, but this particular man taught me like how to be a better educator. And I think I saw my teaching change during that time.
Yeah, and I think those skills are really important, especially at MA, because we have such a diverse, group of students. So I think it makes you really, fit to be our vice principal. So could you describe in your own words your current job and like what led you to your current role?
Sure. So currently I'm what's called an administrative vice principal. So we are called AVPs for short, but mostly just think of it as an assistant principal. So AVPs, we do a lot of the things that happen like running of the school, if you will, like daily operations. And then on top of that, we meet with students and teachers all day long. So we observe teachers in their classrooms. We go to student meetings for like academics as well. So like if students are struggling in their class, we might meet with their family or their guidance counselor. We meet with students to provide support for different things, like maybe a student needs to be connected to mental health resources, like their AVP could help them with that. So in terms of like how is this different than like our IVP or our head principal, Ms. Regati and Mr. Lusco, they're more in charge of like academic curriculum and instruction and like setting the vision for the school. So they kind of set the vision, and then we kind of think of us as like the people that are on the ground, putting it in motion, if you will.
I definitely see you all the time, like around the hallways, and you're always interacting with people. So you guys really do a lot, always on your feet. What is one thing most people would be surprised to learn about your job?
I think students and maybe people that are like don't work in a school, right? Like my friends and family, like when I say I'm an assistant principal, they're like, oh, you're the one that suspends kids. And like, yes, that is true. Like, unfortunately, there are times that students come to this office for disciplinary reasons, but I would say more than often than not, that's not the reason why I'm seeing students. And I think that is a misnomer. Like, people assume that if like Miss Hanson's calling you to the office, you're in trouble, and that's not the case. I often see students because they're struggling with something like someone's bullying them, or because they see a need on campus and they want something changed. I often see students because they need connection to something else, like I said, like maybe mental health resources, or they want to get involved with Boys and Girls Club, or different, a student, maybe a mom calls me and says something like, my student's a 9th grader and they haven't found their thing yet. Help me. I'll connect them to a sport or a club. So I think that might be something that people don't realize that our job really entails.
Okay, so the next question is, what is the most challenging part and the most rewarding part of your job?
So the most challenging thing is this job is nonstop.
Yeah.
Like nonstop. So I tend to get here around 7:30, 7:45, and then meetings start probably at like 8 a.m. And I can have a bunch of things on my calendar, like set meetings, but all of that can be like, well, that's not happening if something urgent happens at school, right? Like your AVPs are like the first responders. So if there is an emergency or a student is in crisis, like a mental health crisis, like we are the first people to respond. So, that meeting that is scheduled might have to wait. And then oftentimes we're here till late at night. Yeah. So like all the different events that, sporting events and things like that, there has to be an administrator. So we take turns. So all of that is hard and long hours, but it's so rewarding when I get to see students like mature and make better decisions. And like I love seeing all of you guys at your events and like seeing everybody like at football games, and you're so happy and hoping that I have some sort of impact in making school feel like a place where students feel like they belong and that they're having like just as good, hopefully better high school experience than I ever had, is the thing that I find so rewarding. And like doing stuff like this with you all and just getting to know students. I was afraid that when I left the classroom, like when I moved into this role, I was afraid that I was like, well, what if I don't know kids as well? And that hasn't been the case. I really feel like I do get to know students, but just in a different way.
And then I have a small follow-up question. You mentioned that like before you were in the classroom, did you teach like a certain subject before you became an AVP, or what was like the path before you started here?
So after college, I actually taught at my old high school for 10 years. So I was a Spanish teacher. And then my husband and I moved to California 10 years ago, and I taught at Woodside High School for 8 years. So I taught for 18 years before I made the transition to administration. So at Woodside, I taught Spanish, and then I also taught AVID. And so I was doing a lot of things at Woodside that were kind of administrative. Like I was the department chair, I was the AVID program coordinator, and I was on a lot of different committees that were working to try to like make changes and make the student experience better. And I like people were kind of saying to me like, have you ever considered being an administrator? And I was like, no, never. And then I just kind of was like, I've been doing this for a long time, like 18 years to do this. If you think about it, it's the same job, right, for 18 years. And I was like, maybe I'll try something new. So I went back to school, got another credential, and this job opened up, and I was like, I'll apply and see what happens. And I applied thinking like, if I don't get the job, no big deal. Like I love my job as a teacher, it's great. But it was an opportunity. So I took a risk, and it paid off.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah. Then our last question for you is, if you could go back and give yourself advice as a high schooler, what would it be? And then also, can you give one piece of advice to MA students?
For sure. So I think as a high schooler, I would tell myself a few things. One is that to be friends with more people. I think we get stuck in our cliques. I think if you challenge yourself to talk to the student that you don't normally sit next to, or things like that, it will serve you well when you go into college or the workplace. The other thing that I would say to myself is to get out of my comfort zone more often, because when I started doing that, when I actually took that leap and like decided to study abroad, once you do it once, it becomes much easier.
Exactly.
And then your life is so rich with all these cool experiences. I I would say to listen to my parents' advice more.
Mm.
Now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, my parents did actually know what they were talking about. And I know that, like, it's our intuition or nature as, like, adolescents to be like, they don't know what they're talking about. But even, you know, now I still call my mom, like, what would you do? You can take it or leave it, right? But it's always good to get advice from someone that's been there and done that.
Mm-hmm.
To MA students, I would say let the small stuff go. Like, there's so many times I'm talking to students and they're like, well, she looked at me weird, or, you know, and it's just, it's not worth it. And my biggest piece of advice is put your phones down more. So I have also been challenging myself to not be on my phone, and I have been doing this challenge of putting my phone away at night and reading a book instead.
Oh, yeah.
And I've read a lot of books that way. So that's my advice. Like, just, I'm not saying don't use your phone, because I do it too. But I think if we all could just appreciate, you know, the moment a bit more and not worry about the picture, that we would have better memories.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this with us. This has been really insightful, and I think MA students can really benefit from hearing from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Miss Hanson.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.